The situation between Charleston White and Young Thug didn't just go viral, it opened a door to something deeper. Something uncomfortable. Something people don't always want to talk about. Because this wasn't just about two public figures crossing paths. It became a conversation about pressure, about past decisions, and about how quickly one moment can threaten everything someone has spent years trying to rebuild. So let's start with a question that sits at the center of it all. How many times can a person walk the edge before gravity finally pulls them down? Because whether you support Charleston White or stand with Young Thug, this story forces you to confront that question. The night that was supposed to be nothing. March 28, 2026. Miami. The kind of night where the air feels heavy but electric at the same time. Music drifting through private venues. Luxury cars sliding quietly through neon-lit streets. The kind of setting where anything can happen, but most people expect nothing will. This wasn't a concert. Not a club appearance. Not a headline event. It was smaller than that. More controlled. A private gathering organized by Druski, known for blending humor, influence, and connections. The goal? Simple. Bring people together. Let them relax. Let them exist without cameras constantly in their faces. But here's the thing about rooms filled with history. They're never as calm as they look. Because when you put individuals with past tension, strong personalities, and different worldviews in the same space, you're not just hosting a party. You're creating a situation. And sometimes, situations don't need much to ignite. Two names, one room, and a history of friction. Charleston White wasn't new to controversy. In fact, controversy followed him like a shadow. He built his reputation on saying what others wouldn't. On challenging rappers, calling out street culture, and positioning himself as someone who doesn't just talk, but acts. Especially when it comes to law enforcement. Some people see him as necessary. Others see him as dangerous. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. He doesn't back down. Then there's Young Thug. A name that carries weight in the music industry. A figure whose influence goes beyond songs. But at this point in time, his story wasn't just about music anymore. It was about survival. Fresh out of a highly publicized legal battle, he wasn't moving freely. He wasn't living casually. Every decision carried consequences. Strict probation. 15 years of supervision. And hanging over all of it, a 20-year sentence waiting if anything goes wrong. So let's ask the obvious question. When someone has that much at stake, should they even be in environments where unpredictability lives? Or is avoiding those spaces easier said than done? The moment everything shifted. At first, everything moved like a normal night. Conversations. Laughter. Background music filling the silence between interactions. But tension doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it builds quietly, until it's suddenly standing right in front of you. According to multiple accounts, Young Thug and individuals from his circle approached Charleston White backstage. Not in passing. Not casually. Directly. Now pause and imagine that moment. The noise fades. The energy shifts. You can feel it before anything is even said. Because when two figures with opposing reputations come face to face, there's always something unspoken in the air. Then came the words. Not casual talk. Not friendly conversation. Words that carried weight. Words that, depending on how they're interpreted, could mean far more than just speech. One phrase stood out. We step on. Now ask yourself, what does that mean in that moment? Is it just talk? Is it intimidation? Or is it something that, in the eyes of the law, becomes something far more serious? Because context matters. And when someone is on probation, context can change everything. Seconds that could have changed lives. Charleston White later claimed he was surrounded. That the situation wasn't just verbal, it felt like it was escalating. He described gestures. Movements. One individual allegedly reaching in a way that suggested a weapon might be present. Nothing was drawn. Nothing confirmed. But sometimes perception is enough. Because when tension reaches a certain level, people don't wait for confirmation. They react. And Charleston White didn't swing. He didn't charge forward. He didn't escalate with violence. Instead, he reached for mace. Think about that decision for a second. In a room where egos are high, where reputation matters, where pride can push people into irreversible actions, he chose something defensive. A barrier. A warning. Security rushed in almost immediately. Bodies separating bodies. Voices rising, then fading. And just like that, it was over. No punches thrown. No one hospitalized. No police lights outside. At least, not yet. But here's the real question. Was that moment truly over, or was it just beginning? The aftermath no one expected. Because what happened next didn't take place in that room. It happened online. Within hours, Charleston White was on camera. Calm, direct, detailed. And this is where things took a turn. Because he wasn't just telling a story. He was building a narrative. Breaking down the encounter piece by piece. Addressing Young Thug directly. Referencing probation conditions. Highlighting how certain words, when documented, can carry legal implications. This wasn't emotional. It felt strategic. Almost like someone thinking 3 steps ahead. And then he said something that shifted everything again. He claimed the location of the event may have fallen under federal jurisdiction. Now stop and think about that. If that's true, if a confrontation involving alleged threats happens under federal oversight, does the situation become something much bigger than a simple altercation? Because in legal terms, small details can create massive consequences. A plan unfolding in real time. Charleston White didn't leave things vague. He outlined his next steps publicly. Filing a police report. Contacting the probation officer. Submitting video evidence. Requesting a restraining order. He didn't wait. He didn't hesitate. He moved. And that raises another question. Was this reaction about protection or preparation? Because there's a difference. One is about defending yourself in the moment. The other is about controlling what happens after. The internet divides. Again. By morning, the footage was everywhere. Clips. Reactions. Breakdowns. Opinions layered on top of opinions. And like always, the internet split into sides. One side saw Charleston White as someone who avoided violence and handled the situation smartly. The other saw him as someone who provokes situations, then leans on legal consequences to finish them. Some people asked, why was he there in the first place? Others asked, why approach someone like him if you know how he operates? And maybe the most important question of all, was this an encounter, or something that was always going to happen eventually? The weight of past decisions. Because here's what makes this story different. It's not just about one night. It's about everything that came before it. Charleston White's history of confrontation. Young Thug's legal situation. The culture surrounding both of them. All of it collided in one moment. And when that happens, there's no such thing as just a misunderstanding. Everything carries meaning. Everything carries risk. A bigger question about accountability. At its core, this situation forces a conversation most people try to avoid. Accountability. Not just legal accountability, but personal accountability. For actions. For environments. For decisions. Because let's be honest, how much control do people really have over the situations they put themselves in? And even deeper, at what point does responsibility shift from circumstance to choice? The thin line between control and chaos. What makes this story so gripping isn't just what happened. It's what almost happened. Because it could have gone differently. Very differently. One wrong move. One misinterpreted action. 1 second where restraint disappears. And suddenly, it's not a viral story anymore. It's something irreversible. And that's the part people can't stop thinking about. So what happens next? That's the question everyone is asking. Will this turn into a legal issue? Will it fade like so many viral moments do? Or will it become something bigger, a turning point in someone's life? Because history shows us something important. Moments like this don't always explode immediately. Sometimes, they unfold slowly. And maybe this is the most important question of all. When you know the stakes are high, why take the risk at all? Is it pressure? Is it the environment you can't fully escape? Is it ego, the quiet voice that whispers, "Nothing will happen to me"? Or is it something deeper? Something people don't fully understand until it's already too late? Because, in the end, this wasn't just a viral moment. It wasn't just another clip making rounds on social media, dissected frame by frame, debated by strangers, judged by millions who weren't even there. It was a reminder. A sharp, uncomfortable reminder. That no matter how far someone has come, no matter how much they've built, survived, or overcome, all it takes is one night, one decision, one moment, to change everything. And maybe that's what makes this situation so unsettling. Because it feels familiar. Not just for celebrities, not just for people in the spotlight, but for anyone who's ever stood at a crossroads and made a choice without fully thinking about the consequences. But here's where things get more complicated. Because this isn't just about a moment. It's about context. It's about history. It's about the weight of everything that came before it. And more importantly, it's about what comes after. But here's the deeper issue. When someone is already under strict legal supervision, does intent even matter? Or is it all about perception? Think about that for a second. Because in everyday life, intention matters. People judge you based on what you meant to do, not just what it looked like. But in the legal system, especially under probation or supervision, perception can become reality. A glance can be interpreted as a signal. A presence can be interpreted as involvement. An environment can be interpreted as intent. And suddenly, what seemed harmless doesn't look harmless anymore. Because perception alone can trigger consequences. And in Young Thug's case, the stakes couldn't be higher. Any violation, association, threats, even being in the wrong place at the wrong time, can potentially reopen a 20-year sentence. That's not speculation. That's not exaggeration. That's reality. And that's what makes every move matter. Every appearance. Every interaction. Every decision to show up or not show up. So the question becomes, when you're living under that kind of pressure, how do you decide what risks are worth taking? And more importantly, how do you avoid the ones that aren't? This didn't start in Miami. To really understand this moment, you have to go back. Because nothing about this was random. Moments like this don't just appear out of nowhere. They build. Slowly. Quietly. Over time. Charleston White has been speaking about Young Thug for years. Long before the trial, long before the plea deal, long before the headlines dominated every platform. Back in 2022, when the YSL RICO case first exploded into public view, most people were still trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. The details were complex. The accusations were serious. And the public narrative, it shifted almost daily. But Charleston White didn't hesitate. He stepped in early. And he didn't just comment, he made predictions. Bold ones. Specific ones. The kind that made people uncomfortable. And most people dismissed him. They called him loud. They called him controversial. They called him wrong. Because at the time, it was easier to ignore him than to consider that he might be seeing something others weren't. But over time, things started to change. Details emerged. Deals were made. Testimonies shifted. And the case, once seen as straightforward, became something far more complicated. So here's a question worth asking. What happens when someone you ignored starts sounding like they were paying closer attention than everyone else? Do you go back and listen? Do you reconsider what they said? Or do you double down on your original opinion, because changing your mind feels harder than staying wrong? Because that tension, that uncertainty, started to shape how people viewed both men. And it didn't go away. It followed them. Right into Miami. The turning point. In 2025, something unexpected happened. Leaked audio connected to the case began circulating online. At first, it was just another clip. Another piece of content in a world flooded with content. But then people started listening more closely. Analyzing. Debating. Questioning. And suddenly, Old conversations came back to life. Claims that had once been dismissed were now being re-examined. Opinions shifted. Not completely, but enough to matter. And Charleston White. He didn't stay quiet. If anything, he got louder. But what stood out wasn't just his reaction. It was his emotion. Because for someone known for controversy, for someone who often leans into conflict, this felt different. There was frustration. Not just anger, but exhaustion. There was validation. The kind that comes from feeling like you've been saying something for years, and no one listened. And there was something else, too. Something less expected. Vulnerability. He spoke about backlash. About threats. About being targeted, not just online, but in real life. And whether you agree with him or not, whether you see him as right or wrong, one thing became clear. He wasn't backing down. So that raises another question. What drives someone to keep speaking, even when it puts them at risk? Is it truth? Is it pride? Or is it something more complicated than either of those? The hypocrisy debate. After Young Thug's release in late 2024, the spotlight returned instantly. Not slowly. Not gradually. Instantly. Because the world was watching. Waiting. Curious to see what he would say. What he would do. How he would move. And at first, it seemed like a fresh start. A second chance. An opportunity to rebuild, to reset, to redefine. But then came the opinions. The statements. The criticisms, particularly toward others involved in the case. And that's where things started to shift again. Because Charleston White saw something different. He didn't see growth. He didn't see reflection. He saw contradiction. Calling someone else out, while questions still linger around your own situation. And that's where the debate really began. Because this isn't just about one person. It's about something bigger. Something uncomfortable. Can you rebuild your image while your past is still being debated publicly? Can you move forward when people are still looking backward? And more importantly, do you have to address everything before you can truly move on? Or is silence sometimes the only way forward? Because that tension, that unresolved conflict, didn't stay online. It didn't stay in interviews or posts or commentary. It followed both men into real life. Into real spaces. Into real moments. Like that night in Miami. What happens now? As of now, no official charges have been confirmed publicly. And on the surface, that might seem like the end of the story. But it's not. Not even close. Because situations like this don't just end. They evolve. Quietly. Behind the scenes. While the public moves on to the next headline. Because even without court action, the impact is already happening. The footage is circulating. Being replayed. Analyzed. Reinterpreted. Authorities may be aware. Watching. Waiting. Evaluating. And public perception? It's shifting. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough to matter. Because perception doesn't need proof to create consequences. And most importantly, probation doesn't operate like regular life. It's stricter, less forgiving, and far more sensitive to risk. There's no room for maybe. No room for it looked worse than it was. Because the system doesn't always wait for certainty. Sometimes, possibility is enough. So the real question becomes, was that moment in Miami just a misunderstanding? Or the beginning of something much bigger? And how do you even tell the difference before it's too late? The bigger picture. Charleston White has built a reputation for one thing above all else. Turning moments into consequences. He doesn't just argue. He documents. He follows through. And whether people like it or not, that pattern matters. Because consistency creates credibility. Not in the sense that everyone believes you, but in the sense that people start paying attention. Even if they don't want to. And that pattern has played out across multiple situations involving high-profile names. Moments that might have faded away. Didn't. Because he kept pushing. Kept speaking. Kept documenting. So here's something to think about. What happens when someone like that intersects with someone who has everything to lose? Is it just conflict? Or is it something more dangerous? Because when actions meet opportunity, outcomes follow. Not always immediately. Not always publicly. But eventually. And when they do, they tend to carry weight. Final thought. Young Thug is in a position where every move counts. Not metaphorically. Literally. Every word. Every interaction. Every decision. Every environment he chooses to step into. Because when the stakes are that high, there's no such thing as a small moment. And now, after one night in Miami, he finds himself back in the spotlight. Not for music. Not for success. But for a moment. A single moment. That could carry serious weight. So let me leave you with this. When you've been given a second chance, how careful do you really have to be to keep it? Is avoiding trouble enough? Or do you have to avoid anything that could even look like trouble? Because sometimes, it's not about what you did. It's about how it looks. And sometimes, that's all it takes. One night, one decision, one moment, to test everything.